Story 1. How to break a bad habit. When I was in college, I developed a bad habit. No, not alcohol or drugs, something far tamer than THOs. I developed a habit of sleeping in class. You see, it seemed as though every class I had fell right after a meal. Breakfast, then comp sci lunch, then general biology, dinner, then statistics. As a result, I tended to drift off as the professors lectured. However, it was an incident that occurred during that last class that finally broke me of the habit for good. Most of my classes were held in lecture halls at the Science Center, a large, multi-storied, concrete building with little in the way of decor. From the outside, it looked more like a parking garage or a penitentiary than an educational facility. Inside wasn't much better. A drab, featureless interior full of the same bland concrete walls and dull fluorescent lighting. Only a small area on the third floor dedicated to offices for the various staff had anything that added color to the place. One evening, after a meal from the student union, I sat in the back row of my statistics course, feeling the tug of my eyelids as the professor droned on down in the front of the auditorium, and my stomach digested my dinner. You never notice yourself going to sleep unless you're actively fighting it, and I was no T1 to wage war on myself. So it wasn't long before I was out, chin in my hands, pen dangling from my fingertips, hunched over a notebook full of scribbles. It wasn't unusual for the teacher to notice when someone was snoozing in the middle of a lecture. Half the time it seemed like they didn't care. They're not paid to wake you up, after all. If you're not paying attention on, they're not going to suffer a pay cut when you flunk out, but some still take a moment to call your name, try to snap you out of it. So when I heard my name being called in the middle of sleep's dark embrace, I quickly snapped to attention and responded. Yes, my face got really hot, anticipating the laughter of the other students, but the moment quickly faded as I realized I was sitting alone in a dark and empty classroom, looking at my watch. I realized that I'd actually managed to doze off through the entire hour, and then some, and it was already past 9 o'clock. Nobody had bothered to wake me, either as a joke out of sheer obliviousness. Then I sat there wondering who called my name. I could still hear the voice in my head, leaving me to wonder if maybe it had been a dream. But then the voice came again. It was low, echoing in the empty room, clearly not my imagination. The auditorium was dark, but I could still make out much of the interior and the MPSC ATS from the smidgen of yellow light that came through one of the exits, especially from my position at the top back row. "Hello," I called out into the empty blackness. Several steps down and to my left, something shuffled, moving along the row of seats. I couldn't see it, but from the sound of it, it seemed to be coming in my direction. Instinctively, my heart started racing, and I stood up, fumbling in the dark to find my books and get out of there. My pen fell to the floor and rolled off the edge of the level I was on, and for the briefest moment I had the insane thought that I needed to go get it. But then the shuffling stopped, and the room went quiet, and I stood frozen in my spot, holding my breath and feeling my heart beating in my ears. It felt like minutes went by standing. In that uncanny silence, I swear the only sound seemed to be the faint ticking of my watch. The need to move, to get out of that room was overwhelming, but some lingering thought in the back of my mind wanted to hear whoever it was, whatever it was, and know that I wasn't going crazy. It obliged, finally breaking the silence by calling out my name again, not with a friendly, curious voice, but one almost devoid of emotion, like a parrot, repeating the sounds its owner makes, but not knowing what they mean. When I gave no response, it moved with a brushing noise akin to someone crawling on their hands and knees, then called again. I couldn't hold my breath in any longer, and I exhaled raggedly, my entire body shaking with fear. It was enough, and the shuffling came again, almost frenetic, moving to the middle of the aisle, then up the steps toward where I stood. Finally, my fight or flight response kicked in, and gripping my books tightly under one arm, I dashed for the other end of the route, nearly tripping over my own feet. Looking back over my shoulder, the room was still incredibly dark, but there was enough contrast between the shadows and the objects that I could just make out the form of whatever it was coming up around the edge of the desks. It had the appearance of a human being, but its gait seemed more like that of a crab walking on both hands and feet, with its knees and elbows bent and its back arched at an agonizing-looking angle. Something about its head also seemed off, the way it bobbed as the thing scuttled, like it wasn't fully attached. The nightmare realized that I was on the move and began scrambling up onto the desktops in a beeline straight for me. As it clambered across the row, it started making this awful gibbering sound with an unnerving excitement to it. Cluck, cluck, glug, glug. I can't adequately describe the noise, but it put the fear of God in me. Any faint notion I had that I was being pranked went right out the window when that thing came at me. I hit the wall hard, bruising my shoulder, and tumbled down the steps toward the front of the room. Through sheer determination, I managed to keep myself on my feet and tore out of that classroom without looking back. Nobody was in the hall. In fact, nobody seemed to be in that part of the building at all. And why would they be? There weren't any classes that late at night, and all the offices and study areas were 2 stories up. The exit to the building was dark, almost as dark as the lecture hall, but I didn't care. I bolted out into the crisp night air, startling several people who were walking past, and didn't stop running until I'd made it back to my dormitory, where I hid in my room with the lights on, door locked, and shades drawn until my roommate returned. So what was it? I don't really know. My strongest suspicion is based on a story I learned later, while talking about the incident with a grad student who had been studying at the school for years. According to her, when the center was first being built, one of the construction workers paving the roof wasn't watching where he was going and stepped on a skylight that happened to be set over a stairwell. He plunged 3 stories, striking the railing several times and landing on his neck, killing him instantly. Whether that story is true or not, I can't be sure. I couldn't find any news articles about construction accidents, and none of the professors I asked would verify it. Nobody else has described experiencing anything like it either. Lines tell you, though, after that I didn't visit the science center after dark, and I sure as hell never fell asleep in class again. Story 2. Spot. I've noticed a spot forming on the dining area wall in my apartment. I figure I should call someone about it, but I'll have to worry about it later. I gotta concentrate on the workload I have waiting for me back at the office. I don't have time to call and make appointments about some weird black spot. My work day is as busy as I figure it would be. There's just a lot to get done, with my deadline creeping up at the beginning of next week. At lunch I mentioned that spot on my wall to one of my co-workers. He told me that a mixture of water and bleach should clear it right up. If I can get home and clear that up tonight, that would be one issue off my mind. I'll try to remember that water and bleach thing when I get home. Finally made it home. I had to stay late to complete phase one of my workload so I can stay on schedule time to try that mixture on my wall, though I'm not too clear on how much bleach to use. As long as that spot goes away, I think I'll be fine. I guess I'll just use an old kitchen rag to clean that spot before I cook myself some dinner and go to bed. Another day, another dollar. Good news, that spot is gone, but I have noticed a weird smell. Maybe I use too much bleach. I dunno. The smell should be gone by the time I get home. Time for some scrambled eggs, toast, and coffee, and see what's on the news. Bad news. It seems that there's another missing person with no clues at this point. I guess I'll keep an eye out. Work was just another rat race for this guy. All this work will make that cheese taste all that much better. I hope I get finished this Friday I can enjoy a stress-free weekend. Okay, there's definitely something wrong with that mixture I used, 'cause that smell is still here. I'll give it another day, but if it doesn't get any better, I'll definitely have to call someone. In the meantime, I'd better get some rest. Well, it's the next day, and I think that smell is still sorta here. Maybe I'm used to it. Well, no time for that now. I think I'll be able to finish my workload and get ready for an awesome weekend. I'll just go ahead and make a few phone calls during lunch to get someone over to my apartment to inspect my wall and that smell. Okay, I scheduled someone to come over Friday afternoon tomorrow to inspect my wall. I'll be able to finish my job assignment in the morning, and I at least have a good reason to get off work a little early. Sounds pretty good to me. Sounds like I'll just have to spend one more night in a smelly apartment before I can let loose this weekend. My assignment is pretty much in the bag, so I think I'll get off work a few minutes early to try and beat the traffic and get some well-deserved rest. I decided to pick up some dinner on my way home from work so I don't have to cook in that smelly kitchen. I think I'll eat in my bedroom tonight with the door closed and seal it up the best I can. As I walk into my apartment, that smell hits me in the face, causing me to cough and gag. Thinking fast, I open a few windows and crank up my seat to air out my apartment. Once I feel like I can breathe again, I venture into the dining area. That spot is back and bigger than ever. It also appears to be leaking some sort of dark fluid. As I get closer, I have to shield my nose and mouth from the thick odor with my coat sleeve. Oh God, I can still sort of taste it. My mouth begins to salivate in preparation for any vomiting that I may do. Forget waiting until tomorrow. I need someone to take care of this, and as I inch my way closer, I call up the maintenance person I had scheduled. After a few rings, he answers, and I quickly tell him the problem I had has gotten worse and can't wait till tomorrow. I give him a quick rundown, and he assures me that he's only a short drive away and he'll be around in a few minutes. I hang up, and at this point I'm right next to the wall, and my eyes begin to water as I stare at the spot with squinting, tear-filled eyes. I notice something small and white poking out of the black spot. With my free hand, I grab a napkin off the table and wipe the all protrusion. As I do, some of the black spot around the area falls away. Startled, I step back and notice the napkin has been stained red. I look back at the newly formed hole on the black spot. At this point, I have a gut-wrenching realization. That sharp, white protrusion, is that a broken piece of bone? With my mind overcome with shock and dumb curiosity, I nudge at the hole with my foot as the rest of the black spot begins to crumble away. My mind flashes with thoughts. I've noticed a spot, worrying about it later. A lot to get done, water and bleach. Spot gone, smell, bad news it seems. Another missing person, rat race, smell, finish my work. Make phone calls, another missing, smell. Finish job assignment tomorrow, another, no clues, smell. Take up some dinner, smell, spot. No clues, missing. I wake up to the sound of my door buzzer ringing in my head. As my memory begins to flood back, I scramble to my feet and answer the door. It's repairman I called. I am rambling, trying to explain what happened. The only clear words I think I was able to blurt out were police, and the wall, missing persons, black spot. As I gesture to the wall, my eyes lock onto the small heap of rotten body parts on the floor, and everything goes black again. Okay, it's been a couple days. My weekend was hell. I had to spend it away from my apartment, which is now a crime scene, and I was bombarded with a lot of questions. After everything settled down, I was able to find out that one of my neighbors had been abducting people in the area. It's unclear and how he would kill them, but once he did, he would eat his victims. The body count is unknown, but it seems that he's recently become a bit picky with the cuts of flesh that he would eat. That's why missing person reports have gone up in my area lately. I mean, he would abduct a person, take the certain flesh he wanted, and dispose of the rest. Figuring he can't flush or trash his leftovers, he decided the next best thing would be to hide his scraps in the walls. My stomach turns just thinking about it. After getting those details, I was given more bad news. Once they figured out which apartment he remains were coming from, they found that the tenant had already vacated. The name and info attached to the apartment belongs to a dead man. With no more clues and no leads to go on, he remains at large. As much as I don't want to stay in my apartment, I guess I have no choice. Now that the police know he's been here, they'll be keeping a lookout, and so will I as foe. Are the rest of you who live in apartments? Keep an eye on any weird spots on your walls and sleep tight. Story 3: The Well. My grandfather grew up on a chicken farm outside of Krakow, Poland. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82. A few days before his passing on, due to an aggressive form of stomach cancer, he sat me down next to him in his old rocking chair and said in his familiar Polish accent, after I took the boat to New York, I promised to leave this story behind. He didn't look up as he spoke to me, simply staring into his cup of black coffee. It's been 70 years. And I must tell someone before I meet God. I was born in a small, quaint, empty town which, despite the Nazi occupation, still functioned. We lived in this two-bedroom farmhouse, my father, mother, and my brothers Michael and Igor. I'm sorry you never got to meet any of them. Anyway, Michael and Igor were twins, identical twins actually, and we had heard rumors of the Nazi fascination with identical twins. This forced us to be even more reserved, even though we already lived in a secluded part of the countryside in the last occupied house in the town. In order to avoid going into the occupied towns, we basically ate only chicken and eggs for every meal, and whatever else Mama could gather from the garden. It was lonely, but we survived. The thing that was most difficult for me was the fact I had to sleep in the basement. Due to Michelle and Igor being toddlers, they required my father and mother's attention. The basement was cold with only a small wind. And the moonlight was the only light I got. Because of this, I always delayed going down there until I was absolutely exhausted, so I wouldn't have to lie there awake. On the nights that I couldn't manage to sleep, I would look out of the window, which gave me a small view of the garden and the large, abandoned water well. This was my daily activity throughout those lonely war-torn nights. In general, it was boring and uneventful, but occasionally I would catch a glimpse of a family, or even just a man or two lovers, sneaking their way through our garden up to our empty door. They always looked rushed and frightened, and sometimes wore tattered uniforms. What would follow were horrible sounds of banging and pleadings for whoever lived there to open up, followed by an argument between my father and mother over whether we should let them in. He moved in the chair to adjust himself. You see, son, we didn't know it. Well, at least I didn't. That we lived fairly close to the Auschwitz concentration camp, and that those people were escapees. Well, did your father let them in? I asked impatiently. No, he said. It would have been a death sentence for them as well as for us. The Nazis didn't like Poles, but they tolerated us, and it was easier to hide Michelle or Igor than an entire family. My father did what he had to do in order to keep his family alive. As the war went on, fewer and fewer people began showing up in the middle of the night. That's about the time our chicken and vegetables began to disappear, losing our only supply of food would not have been tolerable. And at that point, my father suspected it was the escapees, so he built a fence around our property. Despite this, the chickens continue to disappear. They weren't killed, they were simply gone, just vanished from their cages and pens. One night I decided to stay up myself in order to see if I could find out the answer. I told my tiredness until the wee hours of the morning, and despite the poor lighting and rain, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a human figure run across the garden. I rushed upstairs to tell my father, and he ran outside with a knife, the best home defense weapon we could afford. But we found nothing. No one. The next day we did find something, though. Footprints leading from the chicken cages to the water well. They were made in the wet mud from the rain, and they were of bare feet. No shoes, no socks, just feet. My father had mercy on the man who was trying to find refuge, and left him a note indicating that he had 2 days to leave, and then he would begin to seal the well. I waited impatiently for my grandfather to tell me of the fate of the man. The following night, I got the idea to take a blanket down the well to the man since winter was creeping in. I waited until my parents were asleep, and I snuck out. I shouted something friendly down the well, indicating to the poor man that my intentions were benign, and I began my descent, clinging hand and foot to the pegs attached to the stones. As I neared the bottom, I smelled something absolutely horrific, and I pulled my father's flashlight from my pocket to try and shine it on the man. It was then I came to the realization of Rule Saint how large the well was, having been used to supply water for the entire town and its families in the past, families which no longer remained. But I found no man, only a hole, a gap in the stone, where the wall of the well had collapsed, opening up to some type of crevice only 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep and tall. Inside sat not a man, but an entire family, of which only a single skeleton-like creature survived. The light reflected off of its sunken eyes and gray skin. Blood covered its face, and chicken carcasses were strewn everywhere. A pile of decomposing poultry beside a woman, and what I suspected had been her son and daughter, children who couldn't have been much more than 5 years old, and they seemed to have been dead for weeks. The man, if he even could be called that, just gazed at the light, and I stared back, incapable of breaking his stare. I did not feel threatened by him, for he lacked any aggression whatsoever. He simply crouched motionlessly without a sound next to the putrefying bodies of his loved ones and the chickens that must have been his source of water. As their meat was uneaten, he was empty, devoid of whatever in us makes us human. He should have realized the members of his family had died long ago, but he was still bringing food for their corpses. He couldn't accept it. He did finally turn his head, though. When I shone the light back onto the corpse of his daughter, he stared at her and then sat down closer to her and continued his vigil. "You can leave now," I said to him. "I'll open the gates so you can escape. My father will seal the well in the morning. Please leave now." My young voice and advice seemed to have no effect on him. At that moment I decided it would be better for me to just climb back up the well and leave, and hope the man would follow and escape. As I began my climb, I shone the light on him one final time. "What did you see, Grandpa?" I shuddered. I saw a tear fall from his eye. He had become a man once again. He was only able to break free from the delusion after seeing the body of his daughter, which had until that time been obscured by the darkness. He realized then that he had been bringing food not to his family, but to corpses. That night it rained again, but in the morning, when my father returned to seal the well, I found no footprints leading out of it. Story 4. The clock stared at me with its red eyes, shouting to me that he would arrive soon. He always comes at the witching hour. Of course, I didn't know that the witchy NG hour was 3 in the morning till I told my friend about my nighttime wanderer. The witching hour is the time of night when God is at his weakest and all the imps and minions come out. This man was obviously not a 3-horned demon, nor was he an evil servant of the devil. He looked old and lonely. I felt bad for him. He was probably homeless with no family or friends to speak of. Every night, Kitty's there, just sitting in our backyard. Every night I want to go outside and talk to him, but I can't seem to work up the courage. He just sits on the tire swing, muttering to himself. He looks so lonely. Luckily, I had no trees near my window or anything that could block my view of him. My friend says it's a trap to lure me outside. He says that a little kid like me isn't thinking straight this late at night. So obviously, this Prince of Darkness wants an easy meal. He just wants me to come outside and, wham, I'm a nighttime snack. Maybe he has a point, T. Hawk, not about the evil part, but about the unsafe part. The old man might be crazy. I'm sure being homeless takes its toll on your body. I can't see him that well from window either. Lines sleep on it. Maybe tomorrow night I'll go and see if he's harmless or not. The bed looked so comfortable I couldn't help but to flop down onto it. I lay there, waiting for the Sandman to put his speck-heeled dust in my eyes to carry me off to dreamland. The wind was blowing really hard outside. I could hear a tree branch tapping on my window. I bet the man was cold. I wonder if he is smart enough to find shelter. My eyes began to become extremely heavy, but the tree branches tapping kept drawing me out of my inner peace. I stared blankly into the cold darkness when a sudden chill raced its way down my spine. I don't have a tree anywhere near my window. I continued to lie in my bed and stare at window at the far end of room. I didn't know what it could be, a werewolf, Dracula, demon. All my childhood fears ran through my mind. There was a full moon out tonight. What did my friend say about the witching hour? When all the evils of the night came out, and it was full moon. This is doubly bad. The shadows of the room started to gather around my bed, ready to carry me to whatever terrible cave they called home. A thought occurred to me. Shadows. I looked to the wind, down where the moon was shining its light from. My vision followed to where the light met the ground, and my heart sank. There on the ground was the dark outline of a man's upper body. A new fear ran through me, one that wasn't as ridiculous as creatures of the dark, the crazy man outside. Maybe he was the Prince of Darkness, like my friend said. No, I was acting like an 8-year-old instead of the teenager that I was. My senses came back to me. He probably just wanted to get away from the wind and saw me up in my window. So he climbed up the side of the house to the 3rd story to tap on my window to get my attention. My heart was beating out of control. Its rhythmic pace was thrown into chaos. Fear held me paralyzed, but I needed to know what was on the other side of that curtain. A battle between survival and curiosity was raging inside of me. Survival won. I merely took a step back from the window and slowly made my way back, never tacky. My eyes off the window. When I finally reached my bed, I threw my covers over my head and prayed. Prayed with all my might that I was just dreaming. I asked for a sign that I was going to live through the night. God let me know he was listening by making a knocking sound on the door to my room, a slow rhythm, a constant tempo. It never slowed nor quickened. I sat and listened for a few minutes. It seemed the more I waited, the louder the knocking became. It almost reminded me of the tapping on the window. Then a terrifying thought dawned on me. I threw the covers back over my head and shut my eyes as tight as I could and kept trying to make them tighter. I covered my ears with my pillow, trying to block out the knocking. I sat there in my cocoon for what seemed a lifetime. My body finally started to relax, and my mind began to wander off into dreamland. But something wouldn't let me go to sleep. It wasn't the knocking, it was the silence. See, the knocking had stopped, Maybe it went away. I hoped it went away. I sat in silence, wrapped in my cocoon, trying to fade off to sleep. A new noise started. It was not rhythmic like the last two sounds. It was the sound of someone walking, someone who was quickening their pace with every step, someone in my room. The footsteps stopped at the edge of my bed, and I felt eyes boring holes into the back of my head. I could hear the rain, drops dripping onto the floor. I could smell the dirt on his shoes, taste the mustiness of his clothes, feel his breathing on the back of my neck. I knew then that I would not survive the night. Then I heard a deep voice, maybe multiple voices speaking together. "Come with me." I was staring at the man the whole time, and age. His lips did not move, but I knew the words came from him. They rang loudly inside my head. I didn't want to move. I just wanted to hide under my covers until he went away. Then he, or they, say, hid the words that would forever change my life. "We are not the ones you should hide from. But if you wait here, they might find you," the use of the plural coming from the smile. And with many voices frightened and confused me. I had so many questions, but first I had to confront my current fear and follow this thing. I rose from my bed and looked at the man. He stared back into my eyes. No, through my eyes again the voices spoke. "Do not fear. U.S., we shall make you see. Follow us." With that, the man turned and jumped out the window. I felt compelled to follow. I closed my eyes and leapt after him. Down and down I fell. 3 stories is a long way for a person of my size. As the ground neared, I expected the fall to slow till I landed perfectly on my feet. I waited for the man to reach out his arms and catch me. I waited for something magical to happen. The cracking noise of my bones hitting the ground was not what I expected. I laid there on my back. I could feel the blood running through my head and dripping out my ear. My vision started to blur, and the cold started to set in. I saw a figure standing over me. The voices said their fin. Words to me. This was the least painful way we could help you. Please forgive us. The only true place you can hide and never be found is death. I continued to lie in my bed and stare at window at the far end of room. I didn't know what it could be, a werewolf, Dracula, demon. All my childhood fears ran through my mind. There was a full moon out tonight. What did my friend say about witching hour, when all the evils of the night came out, and it was full moon? This is doubly bad. The shadows of the room started to gather around my bed, ready to carry me to whatever rival cave they called home. The thought occurred to Emmy. Shadows. I looked to the window where the moon was shining its light from. My vision followed to where the light met the ground, and my heart sank. There on the ground was the dark outline of a man's upper body. A new fear ran through me, one that wasn't as ridiculous as creatures of the dark, the crazy man outside. Maybe he'd W. as the Prince of Darkness, like my friend said. No, now I was acting like an 8-year-old instead of the teenager that I was. My senses came back to me. He probably just wanted to get away from the wind and saw me up in my window. So he climbed up the side of the house to the 3rd story to tap on my window to get my attention. My heart was beating out of control. Its rhythmic pace was thrown into chaos. Fear held me, paralyzed. But I needed to know what was on the other side of that curtain. A battle between survival and curiosity was raging inside of me. Vow 1. I merely took a step back from the window and slowly made my way back, never taking my eyes off the window. When I finally reached my bed, I threw my covers over my head and prayed with all my might that I was just dreaming. I asked for a sign that I was going to live through the night. God let me know He was listening by making a knocking sound on the door to my room, a slow rhythm, a constant tempo. It never slowed, nor quickened. I sat and listened for a few minutes. It seemed the more I waited, the louder the knocking became. It almost reminded me of the tea tapping on the window. Then a terrifying thought dawned on me. I threw the covers back over my head and shut my eyes as tight as I could and kept trying to make them tighter. I covered my ears with my pillow, trying to block out the knocking. I sat there in my cocoon for what seemed a lifetime. My body finally started to relax, and my mind began to wander off into dreamland. But something wouldn't let me go to sleep. It wasn't the knocking, it was the silence. The knocking had stopped. Maybe it went away. I hoped it went away. I sat in silence, wrapped in my cocoon, trying to fade off to sleep. A new noise started. It was not rhythmic like the last two sounds. It was the sound of someone walking, someone who was quickening their pace with every step. Someone. In my room, the footsteps stopped at the edge of my bed, and I felt eyes boring holes into the back of my head. I could hear the raindrops dripping onto the floor. I could smell the dirt on his shoes, taste the mustiness of his clothes, feel his breathing on the back of my neck. I knew then that I would not survive the night. Then I heard a deep voice, maybe multiple voices, speaking together. "Come with me." I was staring at the man the whole time, and his lips did not move, but I knew the words came from him. They rang loudly inside my head. I didn't want to move. I just wanted to hide under my covers until he went away. Then he or they said the words that would forever change my life. "We are not the ones you should hide from, but if you wait here, they might find you." The use of the plural coming from this man, with many voices, frightened and confused me. I had so many questions, but first I had to confront my current fear and follow this thing. I rose from my bed and looked at the man. He stared back into my eyes. No, through my eyes. Again the voices spoke. "Do not fear us. We shall make you see. Follow us." With that, the man turned and jumped out the window. I felt compelled to follow. I closed my eyes and leapt after him. Down and down I fell. 3 stories is a long way for a person of my size. As the ground neared, I expected the fall to slow till I landed perfectly on my feet. I waited for the man to reach out his arms and catch me. I waited for something magical to happen. The cracking noise of my bones hitting the ground was not what I expected. I laid there on my back. I could feel the blood running through my head and dripping out my ear. My vision started to blur, and the cold started to set in. I saw a figure standing over me. The voices said their final words to me. "This was the least painful way we could help you. Please forgive us. The only true place you can hide and never be found is death." Story 5, Miracle City. I've never been a fan of watching the news. Usually, if the news anchors aren't being overly dramatic about the weather or sports, they're reporting on depressing things like car crash, animal abuse, and child abuse. I find none of this entertaining and typically flip the channel to an episode of South Park. Just recently, A news report caught my attention during a ritual of channel surfing. If the anchorman hadn't phrased it just right, I probably wouldn't be alive right now. I caught the tail end of a news segment before the commercial break, and the anchorman Ross Cooper said, "Coming up, find out what local residents are starting to call a miracle. Our own Dan Aaron reports live on a slowly growing phenomenon happening in our city right after the break. Stay tuned." A line like that was enough to keep me hooked, so I chose to sit through the seemingly endless string of commercials. As usual, you had your movie trailers, store advertisements, and those drug commercials that always show people frolicking in meadows, while a narrator lists all the unpleasant side effects. Commercials always last too long, but I feel it's worth it for listening to this potentially exciting news story. When the news returned, the face of Ross Cooper looked very worried as he reported that there was a breaking news story and reporter Dan Aaron was on the scene. The camera cut to Dan standing inside a darkened home with several other people peering outside a window. It's impossible to see what was happening outside, but shouts and screaming could be heard in the background. I'm reporting from a home deep in the heart of Los Angeles, where other survivors have taken refuge. The miracle that people have been talking about is false. To everyone in the area watching this report, do not go outside. If you hear people calling your name, do not listen to them. And started looking both panicked and nearly ready to break out into tears. Showing concern, Ross asked him exactly what was going on. Earlier today, there was a giant flash of light that looked like a portal was opening up from the sky, and then these things came. I don't know what they are, but they're not human, and they intend to kill us all. Extermination has already begun, Dan shrieked, trying his best to keep cool on live TV. Something inside of me said this was all a prank, but I had to keep watching. Now calm down, Dan. How can you describe these attackers to our viewers? Ross asked. Staying professional, well, a young man in our group described them as shapeshifters, and I believe that's an accurate description. None of us here have seen their true form, but their appearance seems to change multiple times, completely at random. When one of these things looks at you, it's like it can see into your mind all of your thoughts and memories, and it uses this against you. These beings will take the forms of all your friends and family, even those that have passed on. They will mimic their speech exactly how you remember it. Then they'll beckon you to come outside. Why? Them, that's when they get you. When their victims die, their bodies vaporize from this eerie light that shines from their eyes and mouth, and then you hear what they really sound like. And it's horrible. I've seen so many people die today, Ross, and there's nothing left of any of them. Dan had completely lost his mind and was now trembling and sobbing into the camera. Dan, do you feel safe where you are right now? Ross asked. I don't fucking know, Dan snapped back, his sadness turning into rage suddenly. The group that I'm with has guns, and the doors are bolted. But we have no idea what these beings are capable of. I don't know if they're aliens or demons, but their numbers are growing by the minute, and I think LA will soon be overrun. Any with me is in a bad mental state right now. We can hear our loved ones calling to us, begging us to go out and see them. I just saw my great-grandmother moments ago, and I want to run to her, but I can't. This seems like the end of times, and I'm sure this is happening elsewhere and that the human race may be wiped out, but if we can just hang on and not let our emotions cloud our judgment, we will survive long enough for help to arrive. Call the military, call everyone you can. We can't let these creatures win. Tan exclaimed right before the signal started to die. The last thing I remember him saying was, "Oh God, I think a few got inside," before he faded out, and a shocked Ross Cooper announced that his station would be going off the air. An emergency broadcast signal start. Seconds later, and I just sat there on the couch in silence. I didn't know if I should call everyone I knew or wait and see if this epidemic would even affect my area. I felt the sudden need to look outside, and just as I did so I saw, of all people, my old gym teacher, Mr. Moores, who had mentored me and helped me become the athlete that I am today. He called to me, reminding me how long had been since we last spoke. Of course, I knew it wasn't really him, and had I not watched the news report when I did, I would have gone out to talk to him, only to eat an agonizing death. Behind him, approaching from a distance, was a mob of these invaders that were marching through my neighborhood. That's the last time I glanced outside. Now I sit locked in a dark basement with only the glow of this computer screen. All the doors to my house are locked, and all lights that would attract attention are out. I think the mob has bypassed my house as I can hear anyone else calling my name. I've just heard screams of terror from my other neighbors, and I think they're dead. It's very quiet now. I've already warned everyone I can think of to stay indoors. I'm sure I'll think of more people as the night goes on, but for now I'm just going to focus on getting this story out. I know the military will act. I'm sure they'll be here any minute to get whatever this is under control, but if not, I have enough supplies to hopefully last a month or two the most. After doing constant research online, I'm certain that this is now a global phenomenon. Videos are starting to appear on YouTube shot by people who have barricaded themselves in either their homes or public places, and these videos feature footage of mobs like the one I just saw not long ago. One particular video comes from as far away as Tokyo, Japan. The video already has over 1 million views, and in the comments section, several people have claimed to have seen their own relative in the mob that was filmed by a man from the 4th floor of his apartment building. I checked it out for myself, and sure enough, all the way from Japan, I saw my grandfather, my uncle, and my stepmom marching through the streets, and they seemed to be staring right at me through the computer screen. Videos like this are proof that we are now dealing with a force far beyond our understanding. What exactly are they? How did they get here? Hopefully we can survive long enough to find out these answers. If I make it through the night, I promise to constantly update my tale of these catastrophic events. My name is Reagan Myers of Los Angeles, California, and I am a witness to the beginning of a new era. Story 6, Morgan's Morgue. My brother Jake always wanted to be an AC tour. It was his passion. In fact, he had just graduated from university with a degree in the arts and was searching for a job. Last week, he asked me to take him to an audition for a new children's show, Morgan's Morgue, which is one of those spooky Halloween-themed shows they make for kids. Being my baby brother, I agreed to drive him up to the studio. It was a new freshly painted building. Gee, the windows were clean, spotless, and we were greeted by a very affable director who shook both our hands and told us his name was Jerry. Jerry seemed very eager to see us and offered my brother a tour of the building. In short, everything looked legit, so Jake went inside to try out. Meanwhile, I went for a bite to eat at a nearby McDonald's. About an hour or so later, I went to pick Jake back up, and boy was he excited. He described how he nailed the performance and that they were going to give him the lead role. I congratulated my little bro on his accomplishment, but he did have one request. Now, Jake didn't own a car, so he needed me to drive him to all his shootings until he saved up enough for his own ride. I agreed, but Ma, to him, promised to pay back all the gas once his first paycheck came. And this routine of hauling my little brother back and forth became pretty old after a while, but I stuck with it. Things got a little odd after the third day of filming for the pilot to Morgan's morgue. My baby brother looked a bit ashen when I picked him up, yet he seemed as dapper as ever. Concerned by his pale appearance, I scared Jake if he was coming down with anything. While he admitted to minor fatigue and a very mild stomach ache, he linked it to a slight stomach virus. The fifth day was far worse when I stopped by Jake's cramped apartment. He was waiting for me like always, but something was very off. For one, my brother's eyes were extremely bloodshot, and he seemed even paler than before. Deathly white. I put my foot down. Jake, cancel today's shooting. I'm taking your ass to a doctor. No, dude, I'm fine. Just a small case of the flu. That's all. Small case, my ass. Just look at yourself. You look like you've got pneumonia. You need some antibiotics or something. Come on, I'm not even congested, just a bit fatigued and maybe a stomach ache. Then you've probably got a bad stomach bug. Either way, you're going to a doctor ASAP. Despite my urgings, Jake was steadfast against seeing a doctor. He claimed this was the final day of the shooting, so he couldn't miss it. After all, he was the star. After taking Jake to his shoot, I was overcome with worrying. Now, I'll tell you something. When somebody is that pale, there is something incredibly wrong with them. However, when I picked up Jake, he seemed as happy as a lark. Even though he looked like a ghost at this point, he clutched a small tape with a look of utmost pride on TH. That tape was the pilot to Morgan's morgue. I'll admit, I didn't know much about the show proper at this point. All I knew about it was that it was an anthology, kind of like The Twilight Zone, where each episode tells a different and related story. Each of these stories would be tied together with a framing device. As we rode home, Jake was frantically telling me the plot of the show. The framing device was apparently a large laboratory morgue run by a mysterious caretaker called Mr. Morgan, who lived with the talking bats. Since the show is fairly low budget, the bats were just puppets. Jake played Mr. Morgan, thus making him the star. In addition, he did the voice of one of the bat puppets. On that ride to my apartment, I again urged Jake to see a doctor, but he first wanted me to see the pilot real quick. Reluctantly, I agreed. When we got to my place, we both plopped down on my big, musty sofa. Jake was quite literally walking on sunshine, even though he looked like a phantom of the opera. Even though VCRs are obsolete, I still had one plugged into my boob tube, mostly because I'm too lazy to get rid of it with a jump in. His step, Jake put the tape in and sat back to enjoy his first masterpiece. There was no theme song or intro of any kind, most likely because they hadn't done the final editing yet. The show just skipped right to Jake, dressed up in lab coat with Frankenstein hair. I couldn't help but notice that, at this time, Jake was pretty much his normal color. Jake, as Mr. Morgan, looked directly at T. He camera and said good evening and welcome to my morgue. He walked over to a nearby bookshelf and picked out a black, rig-looking book. Mr. Morgan said for our first story tonight, and then he was cut off in mid-sentence. The camera cut to an obviously fake bat puppet. I'm not gonna lie, that thing was hideous. It looked like it was made from one of those cheap gorilla masks you see at party stores with yellow eyeballs that wear obviously repurposed ping-pong balls. It was so greasy it called wait. In a voice that sounded like Jake doing a fake Transylvanian accent, Mr. Morgan looked back to the bat. In this shot, I noticed that Jake was somewhat pale, normal for a show to be filmed out of order, but still jarring. Then another bat flew into picture T. His one was far worse. It looked almost real and talked with Jerry's voice, but with a deeper, almost evil inflection. Its eyes were pitch black with practically no shine to THM, and hair that was so greasy, so matted that I felt somewhat queasy. Suddenly, real-life Jake gave out a long, labored wheeze. I burst out of my chair, grabbed my brother by the arm and said, "Fool, CK the show. We're going to the hospital." Jake didn't seem to have the strength to object. I must have did twice the speed limit as I drove Jake to the urgent care. At least, poor thing, he looked so pale. We rushed into the building with me almost holding Jake. The doctors could see that something was very wrong with him almost immediately. As they took Jake to be examined, I decided to return home to relax myself. That stupid tape was still playing when I got back. Seeing that shit made me sick. You ever have a gut feeling about something, even without evidence? I know I did. And that feeling was Jake got sick at that stupid studio. They probably ignored some kind of safety protocol and got him poisoned. A sudden urge to go down to the studio and grill that Jerry fellow overcame me. When I got to the studio lot, however, something was seriously amiss. I walked up there with extreme caution. The building was different now. It didn't look inviting at all. In fact, it looked downright deprecated with broken windows and chipped paint. Then I heard a loud shriek. I drove the hell out of there. Faster than when I took Jerry to the hospital. No way in all of hell was I sticking around there. When I got back to my apartment, I looked the tape over. Nothing unusual there. With slight hesitation, I put the tape back into the VCR. There was only static. That night, I got a call from the hospital. My brother had died. They said his cause of death was odd. The lady said it was almost supernatural. Jake had no blood. Story 7. The boss in 1975. My best friend disappeared. I'm going to tell you what happened. It won't take long because the story is a short one, but that's a necessity of the facts. Quite simply, there aren't many. Here they are. His name was James Wade. He was 13 years old. One night he went to bed, and the next morning, he wasn't there. The front door was open, and James was gone. The house, as far as anyone could tell, hadn't been broken into, and there were no signs of a disturbance. James wasn't a troubled child, and his parents were decent, loving, and hard-working. They all live together in a nice middle-class neighborhood in the suburbs. No one ever saw him again. The police had no leads, no clues, and no suspects. The story pretty much starts and ends there. Pretty UCH ... but not quite. James disappeared on Wednesday night. I saw him in school earlier that day, and he told me that the previous night something had woken him up in the early hours of the morning. Exactly what, he couldn't say. It was late November, and when he'd gone to bed the wind had been shrieking with a vengeance. But when he woke up, everything was deathly still. Maybe the sudden quiet woke him. Sleep is strange like that. Whatever. When he did wake, he woke with a crawling sense of dread, like he'd just surfaced from a nightmare, and as he lay there with his heart pounding in his chest and the silence pounding in his ears, he heard something, faint at first, the low, heavy growl of a big diesel engine, somewhere close and getting closer. Then, as it approached his house, he heard a second noise. It took him a moment to realize it was a horn, beeping gently like someone taking care not to wake the whole street, tapping out a friendly writ. A kind of toot-toot, toot-toot, but it was a horrible noise, James said, tortured and unnatural, like the honking of a dying goose. He crept to the window and looked outside, crawling down the empty street at the unhurried pace of an ice cream van was an old school bus, a battered yellow GMC, one of those things that looks like a cross between a tractor and a horse box. It looked like it had driven through a swamp. There were mud splatters radiating out from rusted wheel arches and dead leaves rotting in the windscreen grill. The windows were streaked with grime. At least one of them was cracked. Some of the body panels had been replaced, and the bodywork was a patchwork of yellow shades adorned with black lettering that was peeling away, hanging off the sides of the bus like shreds of torn skin. James didn't switch on the bedroom light, and he didn't open the curtains. He just kind of peered through a crack between the drapes. But when he did, the bus rolled to a stop. It stood there for a few moments, idling in the center of the road. Then its headlights flashed. By now, James' skin was crawling in terror. Seeing an old-school busso in a quiet residential backstreet in the early hours of the morning was a strange sight, but it shouldn't have been one that inspired blind terror. But it did. James could sense that something was very wrong. He dived back into bed and pulled the sheets over his head. He lay there for a while with his heart beating, and some time later, not long, maybe 5 minutes, he crept back to the window. The bus was outside his house. When he inched the curtains open, the horn went beep, beep, a friendly beep. Come on, it's time to go beep. James went back to bed, and this time he stayed. The horn honked a few more times. A few minutes later, he heard the bus pull away. On Wednesday morning, when I saw him in school, James had black bags under bloodshot eyes. He claimed he had an. He slept a wink. He was clearly distressed. I made a mistake. He kept telling me I shouldn't have looked. He kept saying, "It doesn't mean anything." I told him it's just a bus. But nothing I said seemed to reassure him. I shouldn't have looked, he kept saying, and that's where my story ends. Me and James went our separate ways at the end of the school day, and I never saw him again. That's it. No big reveal. No explanation, no twist, no climax, nothing. Unfortunately, life is like that. Loose ends and unanswered questions. I'm in my 50s now. Sometimes I get nightmares. Sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're different. But even when they're different, they're just variations on a theme. Here's one. It's late at night, my car has blow. When a tire, I'm fixing it by the side road. I hear an engine. It gets closer and closer until I'm shielding my eyes from the glare of oncoming headlights. A school bus rolls by. As it passes me, I see a kid in the back window, banging the glass and screaming. Something that's lost in the roar of the GMC's huge diesel engine. It's James. He hasn't aged a day. I'm not a superstitious man. There's nothing in this story that can't be explained rationally. Maybe the bus had nothing to do with James' disappearance. Hell, maybe there was no bus. Maybe he dreamt the whole thing. Even so, I've got two children of my own, and when they were young, I told them an embellished version of this story. A story about an old school bus that cruises the streets at night. It moves slowly, he a stalking cat, its horn honking gently. A siren song, too. Curious children, and if any children get out of bed, go over to the window and look outside. The bus will roll to a stop the next time they look out of the window. It will be parked outside their house. Soon after that, maybe even the same night, that child will disappear without a trace. I told them that sometimes you can see the bus during the day, but during the day it can't hurt you. During the day it just travels from town to town. Sometimes adults see it too. It can't hurt adults. Or maybe it can. It just doesn't. Want them mostly. Adults don't even notice it, but even when they do, they certainly don't notice anything strange about it. Because although you can see through the windows, you can't see and see. To the bus, you can't see the children banging on the glass, crying and screaming and wondering why the hell you're just standing there looking at them. And why the hell you don't do something. You can't see the children who gave up hope long ago and now just sit there staring into space or sobbing into their laps. The children never get old. The bus never stops. My children cried and wouldn't sleep for a week. My wife was livid. I didn't care. I'm not saying that what I told my children is true. It's a bastardized version of what James told me with gaps filled in.